Deborah Sampson disguised herself as a man and enlisted under the name of Robert Shurtleff, assigned to a light infantry company. After being wounded, it was discovered that Shurtleff was a woman, and she was discharged. Years later, Congress admitted her claims as a soldier and granted her husband a widow's pension after her death. Sarah Emma Edmonds, U.S. Army. Enlisted as Franklin Thompson in the 2nd Michigan Infantry, served as a mail carrier and a spy. Upon suffering injuries, Franklin deserted from the Army. Later, Edmonds served as a nurse using her real name. She even wrote a book titled Memoirs of a Soldier, Nurse, and Spy, A Woman's Adventure in the Union Army. Loretta Velasquez, the Confederate Army. She joined her husband and became known as Lieutenant Harry T. Buford. After her time with the Army, she became a double agent. As an unusual first for women in the military, Captain Sally Tompkins was the first and only woman ever to commission into the Confederate Army. Confederate President Jefferson Davis commissioned her as a captain of cavalry in 1861 to keep the Richmond Hospital running. She was buried with full military honors. Harriet Tubman. Best known for her work with the Underground Railroad, she also served as a Union Army nurse, scout, spy, and soldier. Elizabeth Van Lew, U.S. Army. A Quaker that led a spy network and helped Union soldiers escape from Richmond prisons. Belle Boyd of the Confederate Army. Marie Isabella Belle Boyd was a Confederate spy beginning her work at age 17. In 1861, she shot and killed a drunk Union soldier who insulted her mother. Arrested at least 6 times and finally imprisoned in Washington, D.C. in 1862. Dr. Mary Walker was rejected when she applied as a surgeon to the Army, so she volunteered to be a nurse. She was captured and held prisoner for 4 months, then exchanged for a Southern prisoner. Afterward, she was commissioned as a surgeon. She was awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor. Dr. Walker is still the only woman to be awarded this medal. Cornelia Hancock, U.S. Army, a Quaker and an Army nurse. Susie King Taylor, U.S. Army, a secretly educated 14-year-old slave who served as a literacy teacher to off-duty soldiers, laundress, and nurse's aide. Kathy Williams, U.S. Army, a freed woman and the only documented woman to have served with the Buffalo Soldiers. Dorothea L. Dix. Shortly after the Civil War began, Dix was appointed by the Secretary of War, Simon Cameron, as superintendent of women nurses for the Union Army. She ordered and outfitted the Union hospitals and managed roughly 6,000 women. She was the first woman to serve in a high-capacity federally appointed role. Clara Barton, appointed Lady in Charge of Hospitals of the Army of the James by Major General Benjamin Butler, also known as the Mother of the American Red Cross. Dr. Anita N. McGee, U.S. Army, appointed Acting Assistant Surgeon General, placing her in charge of selecting nurses to work for the Army. Esther Voorhees Hasson, U.S. Navy, served with the Navy on the hospital ship Relief, a ship that was used to evacuate casualties from Cuba. Leila LeBrand, U.S. Marine Corps. She was one of the first 10 women to join the Marines after America entered World War I. She was assigned to the Marines Publicity Bureau. After promotion to the rank of sergeant, she edited newsreels of war footage of Europe and the first military training film, all in a day's work. After her discharge, she managed her daughter, Ginger Rogers' career. Kate Walker, U.S. Lighthouse Service, was 70 years old in 1919. 3 years later, in 1921, Walker and 3 other women lighthouse keepers were awarded the World War I Victory Medal for their service. Merrill Egan Anderson, U.S. Army Signal Corps, one of the telephone operators that became known as the Hello Girls. The Hello Girls were granted veteran services by the GI Bill Improvement Act of 1977, enacted by former President Jimmy Carter. B. Arthur served as a Marine reservist during World War II before going on stage and becoming the beloved Dorothy Zbornak on The Golden Girls. She was at Cherry Point, North Carolina from 1944 to 1945, where her duties included being a driver and a dispatcher. Oveta Culp Hobby requested to assemble a women's support section for the Army. She was the first commander of the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps. In 1945, Hobby received the Distinguished Service Medal for Outstanding Service. The citation read, "Without guidance or precedence in United States military history to assist her, Colonel Hobby established sound policies and planned and supervised the selection and training of officers and regulations. Her contribution to the war effort of the nation has been of important significance." Jacqueline Cochran became the first woman to win the prestigious Bendix Trophy in 1938. In 1942, she was the head of the Women's Air Force Service Pilots, or WASPs, where she oversaw and trained women for flying experimental Air Force planes. Maud Dennison Denny Williams, U.S. Army Nurse Corps, one of 66 Army and 11 Navy nurses taken captive by the Japanese. These nurses could not take care of the military patients, but did care for the other interned civilians at the camp. Her memoir, To the Angels, was published in 1985. Charity Adams Early, U.S. Women's Army Corps, the first African American officer in the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps. By the end of the war, she was the highest ranking African American woman in the Army. Josetta Dermondy Wingo, U.S. Navy, joined the waves towards the end of the war and taught men how to shoot down enemy aircraft. Senator Margaret Chase Smith, U.S. Air Force, co-sponsored the WAC bill with Edith N. Rogers. After a tour in the Pacific Theater, convinced her that Navy nurses needed permanent status. Linda Van Devanter, U.S. Army Nurse Corps, served for 1 year during Vietnam, and despite what she dealt with when she came home, she continued her nursing career. She founded the Women's Project of the Vietnam Veterans of America and testified before Congress on behalf of women Vietnam veterans. Luann Johnson, U.S. Navy and Marine Corps, enlisted into the Navy and 9 years later commissioned into the Marine Corps. She earned the Navy Commendation Medal and Air Force Achievement Award as a journalist, radio, TV broadcaster. After her service, she became a high school teacher and author. Barbara J. Dolinsky, U.S. Marine Corps, the first of 8 female officers and 28 enlisted women in the Marines to serve in Vietnam. She was a top secret control officer for the Military Assistance Command. Kelly Flynn. In 1995, as an Air Force Academy graduate, she became the first woman B-52 bomber pilot. Commander Darlene Iskra. In 1990, she became the first woman to command a U.S. Navy ship, the USS Opportune. Linda Bray, U.S. Army. She is considered the first woman to lead troops into combat. She commanded the 988th Military Police Company for a deployment to Panama for Operation Just Cause. Mary Ginger Jaycox, U.S. Marine Corps. Her career started in 1974 and had several firsts. She was the first female officer assigned to a combat support operational billet and the first to command a Marine Security Guard battalion. In 2005, Army Sergeant Leanne Hester was awarded the Silver Star for her actions during a firefight that took place outside of Baghdad, the first Silver Star in U.S. military history awarded to a female soldier for direct combat action. In 2007, Army Colonel Stephanie Dawson became the first female brigade commander in the New York Army National Guard. In 2008, Army General Anne E. Dunwoody became the first female four-star general in military history. In 2015, Army Captain Kristen Greist and First Lieutenant Shay Haver became the first women to graduate from Ranger School. August of 2020, Chief Joanne Bass became the first female Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force. Annie Wittenmeyer designed a system for feeding soldiers in field hospitals, which is now standard practice in all hospitals. In 1971, Lieutenant Colonel Cheryl Hines Smith became the first woman in the military to stay on active duty status while pregnant and remained in service after the birth of her child. She helped to pave the way for future generations of women in uniform. Mary Kay Hertog, U.S. Air Force, first female top cop and first to make Major General within the Security Forces career field. Emily Thompson became the first woman to fly the F-35A Lightning II in combat. Retired Navy Captain Rosemary Mariner, among the first women to earn her pilot wings in 1974, the first to fly a tactical fighter jet, and the first to command a Naval Aviation Squadron in 1990. Coast Guard Chief Petty Officer Karen Voorhees became the first woman to advance to the rank of Chief Petty Officer since women were allowed in the Coast Guard in 1973. Ensign Matrice Wright became the Navy's first black female naval flight officer. On December 14, 1973, Army privates Joyce Kutch and Rita Johnson became the first women to graduate from basic airborne course. Major General Jean Holm was appointed Director of Women in the Air Force in 1965. She served in this role twice, updated policies, and doubled the number of women in the Air Force. After her retirement, she served as President Ford's Special Assistant in the Office of Women's Programs. Major General Marcelet J. Harris. Commissioned in 1965, she had a variety of assignments. Many of these assignments resulted in firsts for women in the Air Force, like first woman aircraft maintenance officer, one of the first 2 women air officers commanding the U.S. Air Force Academy, and others. Josephine B. Bowman, Navy, obtained the rank of Lieutenant Commander in recognition for her service as Nurse Corps Superintendent. She was the 3rd Superintendent of the Navy Nurse Corps. Esther McGowan Blake, the first woman in the Air Force. Stephanie Czech Rader, Women's Army Corps Office of Special Studies. Recruited for her fluency in Polish, she went undercover in 1945 as an embassy secretary and moved throughout Poland to collect information on Soviet troop movements. Carol Barkalow, U.S. Army. Barkalow was one of the first 118 women admitted to West Point. Master Sergeant Silverine Vineyard James, U.S. Army, an integral part of the desegregation of the armed services. Thank you for watching.